Okay, guys, so I'm going to do a comparison on Sportsbox of Lydia's swing, but I'm going to do it just because I'm on an iPad and the Wi-Fi is not very good, and I'm in travel right now. I'm going to have to separate them both and then bring them together on video. So normally I could put side by side, but I think this will be better and actually bigger also, so you can see it a little bit more clearly. So what I find to be interesting is that if I was to classify it and keep it simple, is that Lydia's swing when she was 15, I think it was here, and we want to thank Travis for posting this swing online. I just screen recorded it and decided that I would use it. This is more of a rotational golf swing here, and there's a little bit more displacement of force. So, and obviously highly successful, won a bunch of tournaments doing it this way, and then on top of it making a pretty substantial swing change and then getting back to number one in the world again. So hats off to her as a player and the coaches that have helped her along the way. So I want you to watch this. So what's interesting is the first part off the ball, so we'll call like shaft parallel, okay, which is position 2, right around in here. We would say that at this point she's turned her pelvis about 20 degrees, and her pelvis has moved 3 degrees to the right. Now this is important because we're going to see in the next video that that's a pretty significant change, okay? So we could definitely say that she's moved her pressure to the right, and we could say that maybe loaded her trail side and shifted pressure to move her mass to the right, is kind of indicative of power, but not getting your mass over your right, that wouldn't be good, but like creating some displacement there. And then as she goes to the top, we'll go to the top of her swing right around in here on the 3D. You can see that, she turns her pelvis to the top 47 degrees with 100 degrees of rib cage rotation. Now, that's great. Like, that's, not limiting. That's not resisted or anything of that nature. So she knows how to turn into her right hip, okay? And this is a big thing, because if you do decide to go down this road, which is just a way, it's not the way, but a way, you really have to have very good control through the pelvis, glute, and trail leg, and know how to load it, okay? And this is very similar to, I would say, like Rory McIlroy at this point, okay? So like Rory's very good at loading the trail leg, and he doesn't just rotate his pelvis and keep it zero. Like it displaces because he's creating a large amount of force. And we actually see this also with a lot of long drive guys, where like Justin James is almost 4 inches to the right at like P3. So because they're trying to create a lot more force. So, and in Lydia's case, she does that. And what's interesting is it recenters. It starts to, you can see recenter into the transition back to 0. Okay, so there's not a heavy down and left piece here. Okay, so what does happen is she drops the mass quickly and then turns on this horizontal torque, which we could call like a merry-go-round of rotation, so that she has some separation there. So you can see that her chest is still closed, 45 degrees, give or take, and her pelvis is back to 0 at this point in her swing. Now, I'm not going to go into the differences in her wrist angles, her lead arm position, her trail arm position, because they are significant, and that would take a long time. But I think those things happen more or less through a little bit of the loading going back, obviously, and where things, kind of load with those arms. But a lot of those are also indirectly affected by how the pivot works. So if you're a rotational player, we can definitely say that, and we'll kind of show you this, that her hand path from the top works more out because there is more shear force. There's more rotational force going on. Okay, so segmentally, those knees and hips scoring very, very early, she's got to have a lot of separation in order to do this, so her arms don't come too far out. But then as she comes down, you can see she creates a lot of room. So like at P6, which is, shaft parallel to ground here, you can see there's a lot of room between the hands and the hips, okay? And which is a good thing. But you can see how open her pelvis has gotten and how quickly, and this is something to kind of note here, her pressure was in the lead toe ball of her foot, and it's pushing back towards the heel and straightening the left leg very, very early. So kind of at this release point right here, you can see she's still a lot of room. Right wrist is bent, left wrist is, back into extension pretty much. And she's hyper open with her pelvis, okay? And I say hyper, I don't mean like in a bad way. It's on the high end of good, okay? And her pelvis is only open or is only forward 2.5 inches. So definitely more of a rotational player at this, historic part of her career. And you can see like there's not a huge amount of lateral towards the target until kind of late. All right, so, but like I said, a very effective pattern and very, very consistent SportsBox. And I think, what's interesting is that this is more, I would say, like a blend 50-50 vertical force, rotational force pattern, very similar to actually Nelly in a lot of ways. And also, I think for the average player out there, I would say this is probably more up your alley, what you should try to do, to be quite honest. Mainly because of what we're going to see. Like, we might even do it even more, to be fair. So, but I think it's a very conventional swing and, really, really good. So, okay, so we can see like in the address, there's a little different setup. In the previous video, she had a little more internal rotation on the trail leg, a little less foot flare underneath the right foot. Everything matters. Everything kind of lines up. Everything counts. So anytime you move a joint in a range of motion, plus or minus, it's going to affect other things in the chain. So in this respect, she does have foot flare and she does still load to the right. So like, that is still the situation. However, she's got a little more, kind of external rotation of the trail femur at this point, and she's got 10 degrees more pelvis turn. What she also did is she moved an inch less to the right, okay? Now, I think for the average player at home, this is heading more into your wheelhouse. This is stuff that you should probably be looking at, because if you move your pelvis too far right, generally speaking, and this is just general, it's not always the case, you have to recover that somehow. So in her case, this is more orthodox. And I say that lightly, like a lot of things are debatable and opinionated, and my opinion may or may not be right on that, but just from doing a lot of regular lessons with regular people, kind of a good thing. So you can see kind of at lead parallel, she still has her center of her pelvis right of center. She's turning, and she actually gets more rotation here, upwards of about 4 or 5 degrees more turn with her chest, but mainly because her pelvis recenters a little bit more, already an inch, because she didn't move 3 inches, and she's gotten more pelvis rotation. And now what's interesting about that is she's never lost the fingerprint of her getting her pressure to go down and left. And you can see that she's moved an inch forward with the center of her pelvis, and she's still got a lot of separation, which is great. That's why that DNA hasn't really changed. The only real difference I would say is because she's got more turn to the top And, I would say maybe more separation if you want to call that. Her arms are actually more in at P5 here, which we're going to get into here momentarily. And so, like I said, like this is more standard. And I would say like probably easier to fix certain things for the masses of golfers, because if the hand path is too out, that causes a whole bunch of problems because a lot of people aren't flexible enough to create a lot of side bend. So this is more standard deviation. So as she's extending the left leg, you can see that the pelvis is slightly more forward here, okay? Not a whole bunch, but slightly. And then into impact, straightening the left leg, and very similar here to her, old swing, if you want to call it her old swing. And things tend to try to line up a little bit more. So she's got more frontal plane torque or more vertical force matchup to her horizontal. So this is like one of those 50-50 relationships, okay? So if we're looking at somebody who does just purely frontal plane or purely vertical, that would probably be somebody who kept their pressure more centered or more forward, and they're just going to push more vertical. They don't have enough shear to cause a rotation. The only issue I have with that is that potentially puts people into a compromised position if you add a lot of speed to that to potentially like your lower back. So we want a kind of a nice 50-50 on that. So not to get too much in the weeds though, guys, but let's go to down the line and we'll look kind of at that hand path. Okay, so pressure is going to the lead side, more separation. You can see the lead arm is significantly more in and kind of, what we would tell everybody to do, as the masses of golfers are, slicing golf balls and hitting too far left. You can see with Lydia on this pattern, her arm is more in and, pretty much conducive to probably hitting it pretty straight or hitting, different ball flights from this position. The one thing I will say, and this is just from a visual standpoint, is that her right hip is a skosh higher than her left at this point, and that's pretty much indicated because the pelvis is only, less than an inch forward at this point. Typically, if you're looking at somebody maybe like a Rory McIlroy or a Xander Schauffele that draw the ball, through this transition, their pelvis will drop down and left a little more aggressively and create more separation to push harder. And so typically we would see most of these golfers, let me put a yellow line just because I'm getting older and I'm blind, but they would have the pelvis a little bit more forward at this point, okay? Now, I'm not saying a lot, like you don't necessarily want to blow through it where your hip gets outside that foot, but having that a little bit more forward for most golfers would be a good thing. And quite frankly, if you don't have mobility, you don't have the ability to do that indirectly, then you're probably going to limit the amount of shift into the right that you probably would have to enable yourself to do that. So anyways, like I know it's a kind of a broad overview, but I thought it was very interesting for me. So hopefully it's interesting for you guys. I think this is pretty much a testament to the level of golfer that she is, and the ability and belief in herself to make changes is massive. And it's definitely a big credit to her and her team and teams that she's worked with, because it's no small feat to do